In today's journey, we make up for dropping the ball on the last hard seltzer series by making a White Claw clone, this time with 90% less yeast massacre. How will we achieve such a feat? By following the instructions provided by Adventures in Homebrewing. Or Austin Homebrewing Supply if you read the instructions. But don't worry about that, because this extremely easy to complete kit is probably the best place for most homebrewers to start. But unfortunately, its simplicity is also its shortcoming. For example, this mineral pack is going to be the largest flavor component in this product outside of any optional ingredients. Even picking the wrong water can make your product not come out clear in the end. They are not kidding when they say use distilled or RO water, or your White Claw clone may develop a yellow tinge. And sure, it might be fun to experiment with some other sugars, but the base kit comes with 3 pounds 7 ounces of corn sugar, although your kit may come labeled priming sugar. And you shouldn't deviate from that until you've brewed your first crystal clear batch, which you won't know that you've successfully completed until you've used the 75 milliliters of chitosan, or however you would prefer to pronounce it. The really important part here is that if you have a shellfish allergy, skip it. However, do not skip the yeast nutrient additions. And finally, the last core common ingredient that you will find in most hard seltzer kits is a Safale US05. This yeast is not only perfect because it's basically bulletproof, but it will leave the perfect amount of body and residual sweetness for our White Claw clone. This one is going to be a mango, but check out the links in the description so you can see some of our other flavor suggestions. The other optional ingredient is the priming sugar, and that's only if you're going to bottle. We buy our corn sugar in bulk, so we actually just weighed out 5 ounces of our own. But omit the priming sugar if you're going to keg, but then you would need a soda regulator. But that's enough unboxing, let's start brewing. Start by putting 2 gallons of distilled or RO water into a brew pot. Could you use more or less depending on your situation? Probably. Is there a reason for using 2 gallons? Yes. By using an excessive amount of water, we're able to dissolve the sugars really easily, especially at these higher temperatures. But by not using the entire 5 gallons up front, it's going to be a lot easier to cool down at the end. Also, easier to bring to a boil. And as always, it's traditional for Phil to throw something on the ground.
It's important to me.
I think it's funny.
Alright, with that out of the way, let's bring this water to a boil. We will be using our time distortion to save your precious time. In the end, if we weren't filming ourselves doing this, it probably would have taken about a half hour to get this completely done, although your times may vary. Once you've reached a full boil, kill the heat, and start slowly adding the sugar in batches. If you are using an electric stove, it is doubly important to remove it from the hot element as you do this. Phil is of course using the overkill method of using an immersion stick, but it is definitely getting all the sugar dissolved well before it gets anywhere near the bottom of the pot. A whisk or wooden spoon would have done just as well. The important thing here is that every time you add sugar, it will get a little yellow, and as you mix it, it should go back to being clear. That's because at 2 gallons of water with 3 pounds of sugar, that's nowhere near the saturation point. But do remember that it is boiling water that you're adding sugar to. It could be dangerous if you're not careful. But as long as you're adding 1 pound of sugar slowly at a time while stirring the whole time, you shouldn't have anything to worry about. But if you don't care about its appearance or how clear the seltzer turns out in the end, then it's all cosmetic at this point anyways. Sugar gets boiled in the beer making process all the time and it turns out just fine. I mean, who's to say that a little Belgian candy sugar wouldn't be a great addition at this point? But let's kick that heat on and get this back to a boil. And at this point, we will want to add the contents of the mineral pack, which at the time of the recording contained 2.5 grams of Epsom salt, 3 grams baking soda, and 2.5 grams magnesium chloride. Although Adventures is known for improving or changing their recipes from time to time. In fact, some of these hard seltzer recipes already have been through some revisions. From adding steps like improved aeration to using yeast nutrient, as the kit now comes with 2 ounces of yeast nutrient, but you will only add a half teaspoon to the boil right now. During fermentation, you will add an additional half teaspoon of yeast nutrient at the 24, 48, and 72 hour mark. Although an actual yeast nutrient schedule isn't listed in the recipe, we're just assuming that this is basically a vegan mead and we're doing the yeast nutrients like it was a mead. But with the second to last ingredient added for the day, we just need to boil for 6 minutes now. What's awesome is that because this isn't a beer, we don't have to worry about boilovers. Just that we don't overshoot the target or boil too hard. We're not actually trying to kill anything because nothing can live on sugar, and distilled water should have nothing in it already. What we're really after is making sure that we invert the sugar. This makes the sugar easier for the yeast to eat. Just make sure that there's no sediment or any undissolved solids at the bottom of the pot before you let this go. And take some time to wonder, if I've sped up time so much, why is it still 712? But with the boil over, we now move on to the cooling process. We like to give a cover on while we get everything else ready, which is actually horrible misdirection because we have a special plan for this. But our recommendations is to either use an ice bath by putting the whole pot into a sink full of ice water, use a wort chiller, or actually our preferred method of mixing this along with cold water into a pre-sanitized fermentation bucket, as that is a great way to work in some aeration during the process, even when using a glass carboy as your final destination. How you get to this point is going to be a bit of a pick your own adventure. We, however, purposely sabotaged ourselves so that you can see a worst case example. See how dark and caramelized that is? That's from not cooling it quick enough. Instead of using any of the actual methods, he just left the pot on the stove with the lid on overnight, and it was actually still a bit warm the next day when he came back down. He said he did this totally on purpose, and I was like, whatever, dude. I also kind of question his aeration method. But even when it's a clear solution instead of yellow, you can tell when you've reached beyond proper aeration when it becomes no longer translucent, but basically opaque. All you really need to do is fill the carboy halfway up and shake the bejesus out of that. And in case you missed that earlier, Phil just took a giant funnel and put it onto the carboy off camera. This is going to be really important in a moment because we're about to mix everything together for fermentation. We're going to add it to a 5-gallon carboy that's already been preloaded with about 2 gallons of water. A huge benefit is that because this isn't beer, there isn't going to be any kreuzen rise that we have to worry about. So our super accurate way of measuring this is going to be basically just to fill this to the brim, but not actually. We're going to leave about 1.5 inches to 2 inches right at the top. We're going to be doing all sorts of experiments to these in the final phases, so we're not too worried that it doesn't come out exactly like White Claw. But if you do, smooth, Phil. I'm sure they'll believe that you were just aerating the water. Alright, but like I was saying, if you do want this to come out to as close to White Claw clone style as you can, then the best way to solve this problem is to not measure exactly how much water you put out, but how much sugar you actually have in solution before pitching the yeast. We would recommend using a refractometer to take several readings of gravity as you're adding the water to make sure that you hit your mark just right. Otherwise, you have no real way to account for boil off. Unless you're a professional selling product, I wouldn't worry about it too much. But with everything mixed together, and so long as your temperature is below 90 degrees, you're ready to add the yeast. Just sprinkle on top, add your airlock to your fermentation vessel, and then put into a place that can ferment at 70 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit for 5 to 7 days. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And check out some of our other hard seltzer videos here. And if you plan to make your own, check out our affiliate links down in the description below.